Level 1, the applicant.
You are 17 years old the first time you see a fighter jet pull a low pass over a county airshow. The sound arrives after the aircraft does. That delay, the gap between what your eyes track and what your ears receive, stays with you longer than the event itself. You don't have a word for what you feel standing on that grass field with your neck craned back and your palms pressed against the chain link fence. You just know that whatever that pilot is doing up there, you want to do it more than you have ever wanted anything. You spend the next year studying. Not because anyone tells you to. Because the alternative is standing still. You read everything on aerodynamics you can find. You take every math class your high school offers. You run every morning before school, not because running has anything to do with flying, but because the goal requires a version of you that doesn't currently exist, and building that version requires starting somewhere. You apply to the Air Force Academy at 18. The application is 40 pages. You need a congressional nomination. You get one from a senator's office after writing a letter explaining why you want to serve. The letter takes you 3 weeks to write. You tear up 11 drafts. The 12th one you send. The acceptance letter arrives on a Tuesday in March. You read it 4 times standing at the mailbox in the cold. You don't tell anyone for 2 hours. You just walk around the block and try to understand what just happened to the rest of your life.
Level 2, the cadet.
Colorado Springs sits at 6,000 feet of elevation and the academy sits higher than that. Your first run at altitude nearly destroys you. Your lungs don't understand the air. Your legs don't understand the hills. The upperclassmen don't explain anything. They simply expect performance and record its absence. Basic cadet training lasts 6 weeks. They strip away the version of you that walked through the gates and begin assembling a different one.
You march in formations.
You recite the honor code until it runs in your head while you sleep. You learn to fold a bed with corners so sharp they look architectural. You learn to speak only when addressed and to stand in a way that communicates readiness even when you feel none. The 4 years that follow are the most demanding academic experience of your life. Engineering mechanics, thermodynamics, aeronautical systems, military history covering 2 centuries of doctrine and failure and adaptation.
You write papers. You take exams. You stand inspections. You lead your peers in training exercises. Your performance in every one of these areas is evaluated, recorded, and used to determine whether you will ever sit in a cockpit. The academic load is the part civilians never picture when they imagine military aviation. They see the aircraft. They don't see the orbital mechanics coursework at 11 at night. They don't see the fluid dynamics exam at 0600 after a mandatory physical training session that started at 0430. You graduate on a May morning. You receive your commission as a second lieutenant. Your parents pin the gold bars to your shoulders and the weight of what comes next settles somewhere behind your sternum where it will remain for the rest of your career. Level 3, the student pilot.
Undergraduate pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base in Mississippi is 54 weeks long. From the first day, the mathematics of attrition are visible. The class that started with you will not finish with all of you. Some will wash out for performance. Some will wash out for medical reasons discovered mid-program. Some will wash out for reasons that are never fully explained, just recorded. You start in the T-6 Texan II, a turboprop trainer that looks friendly from the outside. It is not friendly. The aircraft demands precision at every phase of flight. You stall it deliberately to learn how to recover. You spin it deliberately to learn what the airframe feels like when it departs controlled flight. The first time you enter an intentional spin, the horizon rotates around the nose of the aircraft like the planet itself has come loose. You recover because you have memorized the procedure so thoroughly it bypasses conscious thought. Your instructor pilot has 3,000 hours. He is 34 years old and he speaks in a tone that suggests mild disappointment is his resting state. He grades every flight on a numerical scale and his comments in the debrief are surgical.
Not harsh. Surgical.
He finds exactly the thing you did wrong and he names it without anger and without reassurance. You learn more from him in 6 months than you learned in the 4 years before. You solo for the first time on a Wednesday afternoon. The tower clears you for the runway and there is no one in the right seat and the aircraft weighs 300 pounds less than it did during every training flight before this.
It climbs faster.
It responds differently. The sky over Columbus opens up and for 7 minutes you are the only person responsible for your survival. You land without incident. You taxi back to the ramp. Your instructor meets you at the aircraft with no visible expression. He notes the landing in his book and tells you to be back in the briefing room in 20 minutes for debrief. Transitioning to the T-38 Talon is a different kind of education. The T-38 is a supersonic jet trainer that has been in service since before you were born. It does not forgive. Exceed its limits and it will not warn you.
It will simply stop flying.
You learn formation flight, instrument approaches through solid cloud layers with zero external visual reference, and navigation through weather systems that make the aircraft shudder in ways the airframe is designed to absorb but your body must learn to accept as normal. Track select comes at the end of UPT. They look at your grades, your instructor evaluations, your class ranking, and the needs of the Air Force at that moment in time, and they assign you an aircraft. You are assigned the F-16 Fighting Falcon. You don't sleep the night you find out. Not from anxiety. From something closer to disbelief that the line between wanting something and having it could narrow to a single sheet of paper posted on a bulletin board at 1600 on a Friday.
Level 4, the Wingman.
F-16 Formal Training Unit at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. The Sonoran Desert surrounds the base on every side and the heat in summer is dry and complete and the sky above it is perfectly blue from horizon to horizon. You will spend the next 6 months learning to fight in that sky. The F-16 sits differently than the T-38. The cockpit reclines 30 degrees. The side stick is on your right. The heads-up display projects flight data and targeting information onto the glass in front of you. When you pull the throttle into afterburner for the first time, the aircraft accelerates with an urgency that pushes you back into the seat and does not stop. The G-suit inflates around your legs and abdomen. You breathe against the compression. You strain your neck muscles to keep your vision from tunneling as the G-meter climbs past 4, past 5, past 6. You graduate from the FDU and report to your first operational squadron. Your call sign is assigned at the call sign ceremony, a tradition involving your squadron mates finding the one thing about you that is most worth mocking and turning it into a name you will carry for the rest of your flying career. You do not choose it. You do not get a vote. As a wingman, your job is simple in description and nearly impossible in execution. Fly the number 2 position. Maintain mutual support with your flight lead. Don't die and don't cause your flight lead to die. Execute the briefed plan and call out every threat you see. Ask questions in the debrief, not in the jet. Your first deployment is to a base in the Gulf region. Your squadron flies combat air patrols over restricted airspace, suppression of enemy air defense missions, and close air support for ground units in contact. The first time you drop ordnance in a combat environment, the aircraft shudders with the release. Below you, coordinates on a map become a visible flash. Over the radio, a forward air controller calls the result.
You listen. You note it.
You fly back to base and you land and you attend the debrief and the strike is assessed and accounted for in the mission summary. That night in the tent you've been assigned, you lie on your cot and stare at the canvas ceiling and try to understand what the event you participated in actually was. You don't arrive at a conclusion. You file it somewhere practical and you get up the next morning for the 0530 brief.
Level 5, the Flight Lead.
4 years into your operational career, you've accumulated enough flight hours and demonstrated enough tactical proficiency to be upgraded to Flight Lead. This is the first certification that changes what the mission is asking of you. You are no longer responsible only for yourself. A wingman is now flying formation on your aircraft and their survival in combat is a direct function of the decisions you make before, during, and after the flight. The upgrade requires a formal evaluation. You are tested on your ability to plan a complex strike package, brief it thoroughly enough that your wingman could execute the mission alone if you were forced out of the fight, and then execute the plan under simulated threat conditions with an evaluator grading every radio call, every maneuver, every tactical decision. You pass the evaluation. The certification goes into your records. Your responsibilities double. Your second deployment takes you to a different region, a different threat environment, a different set of rules of engagement. The enemy in this theater has surface-to-air missiles. Not the unsophisticated kind. The kind that can engage you beyond visual range and that require you to fly at altitudes and airspeeds and on routing profiles designed to reduce their probability of kill to an acceptable percentage. The math behind that percentage lives in classified threat manuals and in the institutional memory of pilots who have flown against these systems before you. You lead a flight of 2 on a dynamic targeting mission, which means the target changes after you're airborne. Your forward air controller updates you with new coordinates. You recalculate fuel states. You adjust the attack profile. Your wingman stays glued to your right wing through a turn that pulls 3 GS. You acquire the target on your radar, confirm positive identification, and execute the attack. Your wingman covers your egress and you exit the target area at low altitude, well below radar coverage, and climb back to transit altitude 20 miles clear of the threat ring. In the debrief, you reconstruct every decision and every second. What you did correctly.
What you could have done faster.
What the threat envelope looked like from the threat system's perspective. This is the part of fighter aviation that outsiders never see, the forensic discipline of turning every flight into a lesson that makes the next flight slightly more survivable. Your wingman asks good questions in the debrief. You answer them honestly, including the one about the moment at medium altitude when you were briefly unsure whether the target update was valid. You tell him what you were thinking. You tell him what you verified before proceeding. You tell him that uncertainty is not the enemy. Acting on unverified information is the enemy. Level 6, the instructor pilot. You volunteer for the weapons instructor course. Everyone in fighter aviation calls it WIC, pronounced as a single word. The Air Force calls it the Graduate School of Air Combat. They are not being modest. It is 13 months long and it produces the tactical experts who will go back to their squadrons and function as the architects of how that squadron fights. The course covers every advanced employment concept in the Air Force's tactical arsenal. Multi-ship formation tactics. Electronic warfare integration. Suppression of enemy air defenses at a level of complexity that requires you to think about the entire battlespace simultaneously. Threat systems, friendly aircraft positions, tanker tracks, airspace coordination measures, weather, fuel states, all as a single running calculation that must be updated continuously from wheels up to wheels down. You graduate from WIC and return to your squadron with a patch on your left shoulder that the rest of the squadron recognizes immediately. The patch means something specific. It means you are the person responsible for the tactical development of the unit. It means that when the squadron goes to war, the tactics the pilots used to survive were yours. You become an instructor pilot. You take student pilots through their first exposure to combat maneuvering. You teach them how to manage energy in a turning fight. How to keep a threat in the visual arena without losing sight of the larger tactical picture. How to call a defensive maneuver against a missile and execute it with precision while simultaneously managing every other aspect of the flight. The hardest part of teaching is watching a student make a mistake you could have prevented by saying something earlier and knowing that you chose to let them make it because the lesson would not have the same weight without the experience. You manage that tension every flight. You intervene when safety requires it. You hold back when growth requires it. The line between those two things is not always clear, and getting it right is what separates an adequate instructor from a formative one. One of your students washes out of the program 3 months in. His stick and rudder skills are adequate. His situational awareness is not developing at the rate the program requires. You spend 2 additional sessions with him, working specifically on scan techniques and threat integration. It does not close the gap. You write the evaluation honestly. He is removed from fighter training and reassigned. He thanks you afterward. You're not sure what to say. You tell him the truth. The aircraft requires what it requires and neither of you invented those requirements. Level 7, the Squadron Commander. You are 38 years old and you have been selected to command a fighter squadron. The ceremony is straightforward. A guidon is passed from one set of hands to yours. The wing commander says words about responsibility and legacy. You say words back about the mission and the people who execute it. Then the ceremony ends and the job begins. A fighter squadron is 300 people. Pilots, maintainers, weapons loaders, intelligence officers, life support technicians, schedulers, medics, administrative staff. Most of them will never sit in an aircraft. All of them will determine whether your pilots come home alive. The crew chief who catches a hydraulic fault during pre-flight prevents a mishap that the Accident Investigation Board would spend 6 months reconstructing. That crew chief deserves the same command attention as your flight lead. You learn this in the first 3 months. You spend time on the flight line during late shifts. You watch the maintainers work by portable lights in winter temperatures. You ask them questions. You listen to what they tell you about parts availability and maintenance backlogs and the decision-making under time pressure that happens at the ground level with no officer present. You take notes. You bring those notes to meetings with your maintenance officer and your logistics chain, and you use what you've learned to change things that needed changing. Your squadron deploys. You lead it. The deployment is to a contested environment with peer-level air defense capabilities. The threat is not the unsophisticated systems you flew against as a lieutenant. These systems have look-down shoot-down radar, data link integration, and the ability to engage your aircraft from beyond 60 miles. Every mission requires electronic warfare support, careful routing, and the acceptance that a percentage of your pilots will be flying into an environment where the rules of physics do not favor survival if a mistake is made. You lose a jet on the 4th week. Engine failure during a night mission over the target area. Your pilot ejects successfully. He lands in contested territory and spends 14 hours on the ground before a combat search and rescue team extracts him. You spend those 14 hours in the operations center, watching the feeds and coordinating the recovery. When he walks into the debrief room, you shake his hand without speaking. He sits down and starts describing the emergency sequence. His voice is steady. You write down every word he says. The investigation takes 3 months. Compressor stall caused by ingestion of particulate matter at low altitude. The finding results in a modification to low-altitude routing procedures for the entire theater. Your pilot's 14 hours on a cold ridgeline in enemy country changed how aircraft will be flown in that theater going forward. You tell him that when the investigation closes. He says he would have preferred a different way to contribute the data. You end your command tour. The guidon passes to the next commander. You fly one final sortie in your squadron's jets, a tradition that every outgoing commander follows. The debrief afterward is the last time you will sit in that room as the person responsible for the unit. You look at the chairs around the table, the chairs that have held every pilot you've commanded over 2 years, and you make a note of the number of those pilots who are still alive. The number is the same as the number who deployed with you. That outcome is not guaranteed in this work, and you are aware of that in a way that sits with you differently than it did before you held command.
Level 8, the wing commander.
Command of a flying wing means command of every function that makes flying possible. 4 squadrons of aircraft. 5,000 personnel. A runway, a control tower, a hospital, a fire department, a security forces unit, a communication squadron, a logistics group, and every support function required to operate a sovereign military installation. The aircraft are the reason all of it exists. Every other function exists to put those aircraft in the air. You brief the 4-star commander once a week on your wing's operational readiness. The briefings are 10 minutes long. The preparation for each one takes 3 days. Data on aircraft availability rates, pilot proficiency levels, munition stock, fuel consumption, personnel strength, and training currency must all be synthesized into a coherent operational picture that a combatant commander can use to make decisions about how your wing fits into theater operations. You manage 2 aircraft mishaps in your command tour. The first is a ground incident. A weapons loader is injured when a loading cart malfunctions. He recovers fully. The investigation finds a maintenance procedure that was technically compliant but practically unsafe, and that procedure is rewritten. The second mishap is a Class A flying incident. A pilot experiences spatial disorientation during a night instrument approach and impacts terrain short of the runway. He does not survive. You sign the notification letter to his family. You attend the funeral. You speak at the memorial service. You stand next to his wife at the graveside and you tell her that his professionalism and his skill were qualities his squadron will carry forward. You do not tell her that spatial disorientation is survivable and that the chain of events that led to that particular outcome on that particular night could have broken at any point in ways that might have changed how the story ended. Those details are in the accident report. They will not help her sleep. The pilot's name goes into your mental ledger alongside every other name it contains. The ledger has been accumulating since your first deployment as a lieutenant. It does not stop accumulating. You learn at some point that carrying it without being crushed by it is itself a skill, and that the skill must be maintained deliberately, the same way any other perishable proficiency is maintained. Level 9, the General Officer. You pin on your first star at a ceremony at the Pentagon. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs presides. Your wife pins the star to your shoulder. Your daughter, who is now 22, stands next to her. You spent roughly 4 of her first 18 years physically present in the house where she grew up. She turned out to be a person you genuinely respect, and you are aware that credit for that outcome belongs primarily to her mother. As a brigadier general, you are assigned to the air staff at the Pentagon. You work in a building where every office is occupied by someone who has done something remarkable and no one refers to it. The culture at this level is one of institutional restraint. The work is policy and resource and strategy, budgets for aircraft programs that will deliver jets a decade from now, doctrine revisions that will govern how the Air Force fights in threat environments that don't fully exist yet, personnel policies that will determine the careers of 300,000 airmen you will never meet. You brief the Secretary of the Air Force. You brief congressional staffers on next-generation fighter requirements. You brief allied air forces on interoperability doctrine. Every audience requires a different framing of the same fundamental problems. How does the Air Force maintain the ability to penetrate and survive in contested airspace against peer adversaries who have spent 30 years studying how to shoot down American aircraft? The answer to that question costs money that competes with every other national priority and requires decisions that will not be validated or invalidated until a conflict that has not yet occurred. You are promoted to Major General. You take command of a numbered air force. 50,000 personnel across bases in 3 countries. Your command authority covers operational planning, training standards, and readiness assessment for an entire region of the globe. You work 16-hour days with no days off that are actually off. You brief the combatant commander on a developing crisis. A regional adversary has moved advanced air defense systems into a disputed area. The intelligence picture is incomplete. The timeline for decision is compressed. You present 3 options with honest assessments of what each option costs in risk, in resources, and in potential escalation. The decision is made above your level by authorities with equities that extend beyond your visibility. You execute whatever emerges from that decision with the assets you have and the people you are responsible for. Your 2 stars become 3. Then 4. You are a 4-star general and you command Air Combat Command. Every combat-coded aircraft in the United States Air Force falls under your authority. Your decisions, and the institutional culture you maintain, will shape how the service fights for the next 20 years. You sit in the National Security Council Situation Room. The people around the table are the same people you have been briefing for 5 years, and some of them are new. A scenario is on the table. An adversary has employed anti-satellite weapons and is executing electronic warfare operations against American communications infrastructure. Military options are requested. You present them. The options are not clean. Each one has a cost that cannot be fully priced in advance, and each one forecloses other options in ways that will only become visible after the decision is irreversible. You know, sitting in that room, that somewhere a pilot you have never met is sitting in a squadron-ready room waiting to find out whether the conversation happening at this table will put her in the air over a defended target by morning. That knowledge sits with you differently than any other fact in the room. Level 10, the retired aviator. You retired 7 months ago. The ceremony was held in a hangar at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Your final flight was in an F-16, the same airframe you first flew as a lieutenant, because you requested it and because the logistics of making it happen were manageable and because some things should be closed in the same way they were opened. You flew for 45 minutes over the Chesapeake Bay. The sky was clear. The bay was flat and silver below you. You hang your flight suit in the closet of the house in Virginia you bought specifically because it had enough space for you to eventually figure out what you do with yourself when there is no mission requiring your immediate presence somewhere else. You have not yet figured it out. You are working on it. Your logbook shows 4,800 flight hours. The number is precise in the way that numbers are precise and imprecise in the way that numbers cannot contain what happened during the hours they enumerate. 300 of those hours are combat. You flew 120 combat sorties over the span of a career that crossed 6 major deployments. You flew against surface-to-air missile systems that were designed to kill you and survived because of training, planning, discipline, and some set of factors that resists clean attribution. You know pilots with equivalent training and planning and discipline who did not survive. You have thought about the distance between those outcomes for 30 years and you are no closer to understanding it than you were at the beginning. The names you carry are not only military names. They are people. Your weapons systems officer from your first deployment, who died in a training accident in Nevada at 34 years old. Your squadron commander from your flight lead days, who retired healthy at 52 and was dead of a cardiac event 2 months later. Your student who washed out of fighter training and who built a different career entirely and who called you last year to tell you it worked out, that the assignment change led him somewhere better than the path he'd been on. You hold all of them with the same weight. The ones who died and the ones who lived and the ones who changed direction and found something else. You are asked to speak at an F-35 pilot graduation ceremony in the fall. You stand at a podium in front of 60 pilots who are beginning the careers that you are ending. They are looking at you the way you once looked at the generals who spoke to you at events like this, with polite attention and a private certainty that whatever the old man says will not fully apply to what they are about to experience. You tell them what is actually true. You tell them that the aircraft is a tool and that what they will actually be doing for the next 30 years is making decisions under conditions of incomplete information and time pressure and genuine physical danger. You tell them that the ability to make good decisions under those conditions is not a talent. It is a trained and maintained proficiency exactly like their instrument scan or their formation flying, and it requires the same deliberate attention to development. You tell them that the people they serve alongside will matter more to them than any mission they can currently imagine and that protecting those people, the way crew chiefs protect aircraft, is part of the job description whether or not it appears in any official document. They listen. Some of them are writing notes. Most of them will not fully understand the weight of what you've said for another 10 years. That is exactly how it is supposed to work. You shake hands on the way out and you look at each face and you see them at 19, at 25, at 42, at wherever it ends for each of them. You cannot tell which face corresponds to which future. No one can. You drive home on a late afternoon in November. The highway is empty and the trees on either side are past peak color, the leaves coming down in intervals in the wind. You think about the T-6 solo, about the first combat sortie, about the night in the operations center during the search and rescue, about the situation room, about the hangar where they handed you a certificate and thanked you for your service and turned off the lights and drove home. The certificate is in a box in the study. The shadow box with the medals is on the wall of the same study and you walk past it every morning without stopping. Civilians ask about the medals at gatherings and you answer the questions briefly and accurately and move the conversation elsewhere. Each medal is a specific date and a specific place and a specific set of events that were not decorative at the time they were occurring. You don't need the medal to remember any of them. Somewhere right now, a teenager at an airshow is watching a fighter jet pull a low pass and the sound is arriving after the aircraft, and the gap between those two things is doing something irreversible to her understanding of what she wants her life to be. She will apply to a service academy or an ROTC program. She will go to undergraduate pilot training. She will fly the T-6 and the T-38 and she will track select and she will show up to her first operational squadron with silver wings and a call sign someone else chose for her. She will not know yet what the career actually is. She will think it is the aircraft. It is not the aircraft. The aircraft is the vehicle for the thing the career actually is, which is the sustained practice of discipline and judgment and care for the people beside you under conditions that will periodically attempt to demonstrate that those qualities are insufficient. Sometimes the conditions will win. Most of the time, if the training holds and the planning holds and the people hold, they will not. She will find that out the same way everyone finds it out. By living it. There is no other way to learn it. The cycle continues.